ពួកយើងចាំដឹងថាបងមានអារម្មណ៍បែបណានៅពេលដែលធ្វើជាស្រីរស់ស៊ីមនុស្សភេទទេ
ពិបាកខ្លាំងពេលគ្រប់ពេលដែលខ្ញុំចេញទៅពេលដែលខ្ញុំដូចតំណែងមួយចឹងគេតថ្លៃគេយកទៅតាមចិត្តហើយគេឲ្យលុយហើយក្នុងចិត្តខ្ញុំពិបាកខ្លាំងហើយខ្ញុំឈឺចាប់ខ្លាំងទៀតប៉ុន្តែខ្ញុំអត់មានជំរឿ
We did some undercover work for IJM in a karaoke bar in Siem Reap. We went in 200 to 300 girls waiting for us when we get in there, big numbers on their chest. You just pick whatever girl you want. And it's a weird feeling. It's almost like the girls don't know how to feel. Like, please, oh God, don't pick me, versus if you don't pick me, how am I going to have any money? How am I going to take care of my family? You know, I mean, it must be hell that they have to go through. But you walk into the place and the manager comes up to you and he says, I want you to know, when in the karaoke room, you can do anything you want to the girl. I mean, you can touch her, you can kiss her, whatever you want to do, but you can't have sex before you negotiate a price. Now you get into this karaoke room, gigantic flat screen TV, a high-tech karaoke system with over 2,000 songs in English, 6 cordless mics, beautifully appointed, private bath, 80 rooms like that in this place. This guy owns 8 places like this. That's 16 to 2,400 girls, and we estimate, and we're conservative, that at least a third of them were underage. So you choose your girl, you go to the room, and a woman comes in to police the room. But people would think she comes to protect the girls. She comes to make sure the girls are going after the men, that they're cuddling up to the men, that they're getting the guys to want to have sex, to pay for the big bucks for sex. So we get ready to leave, and I can pay with my credit card. Okay? So you pay with your credit card, and here's your receipt that you get. Tiger beer, $4. Bunch of grapes, $5. Karaoke girl for 1 hour, do whatever you want to her, $3.
In order to truly explain the backdrop of modern Cambodia, understanding the Khmer Rouge is something that cannot be ignored. Cambodia is primarily inhabited by the Khmer people. They were once rulers of a great empire based in Angkor. But their golden age was in the 1200s, and since then Cambodia has been constantly invaded by Vietnam and Thailand, and in the colonial era, France. When French colonialism collapsed, America stepped in as part of its war in Vietnam, and the war brought unrest. The revolution came to Cambodia in the form of Viet Minh soldiers camping in jungles across the border to hide from the French and American bombs. However, for the nationalist Cambodians, it was too Vietnam-focused. They banded around the leadership of a Paris-educated elite called Pol Pot. Forming the basis for what would eventually be called the Khmer Rouge, they started small, just a rebel group in a distant jungle fighting against a beloved king. But everything changed when America began to bomb Cambodia. Without even declaring war, they began bombing the country in force. The United States dropped more explosives on Cambodia than were dropped in the entirety of World War II by all the Allies combined. It was meant to stop communist guerrillas, but it only made more of them. Civilians were being blown out of their homes with their only sources of income destroyed. Tens of thousands were killed indiscriminately, driving people right into the arms of the Khmer Rouge and thoroughly weakened the central government. And then there was the coup. The king did not suppress communism loudly enough, but America was fighting a war. They installed a military dictatorship that hated communists the proper amount, and the king, with nowhere to turn for support, publicly promoted the Khmer Rouge. They promised to reinstate the throne. The average person joining didn't understand the ins and outs of Pol Pot's doctrine, but they understood loyalty to king and country. As the Vietnam War ends and Saigon falls, Cambodia's dictatorship falls with it. They've been heavily reliant on U.S. money, support, and military to stay in power, and now the U.S. is gone. The Khmer Rouge come out of the forest and replace this military dictatorship with something far more brutal. They wasted absolutely no time in implementing their evil plans. They immediately make the city disappear into the countryside, leaving behind everything. have everyone give all their money, items, and food over to the Khmer Rouge and start walking. They kill administrators, soldiers, teachers, anyone they consider elite immediately on the spot and turn everyone else into a countryside peasant. Within hours, the government decided that education was unnecessary. Everything they needed to know in life could be learned working in a rice field. They killed people who wore glasses simply because they seemed elitist. They started to turn all the schools into prisons and work camps like the infamous S-21 in Phnom Penh. Once a high school, it was quickly turned into the most infamous prison in the Khmer Rouge regime. 99% plus death rates of prisoners. It didn't matter what age, gender, creed, position in the party. If you entered the walls of that prison, you would eventually end up in the killing fields just outside the town. The Khmer Rouge believed that they were making a perfect society. In their eyes, they would change everything until all people were the same, not equal, but the same in thought, idea, life, and experiences. They weren't giving jobs based on skills or experience because that would imply that people weren't the same. They were giving them out based on loyalty, on who was a member of the party. The government preferred that their people starve to death than show even the slightest hint of individualism. Soon as the country began to collapse, the party decided to blame spies from within. They blamed the spies within the party from stopping them in achieving their lofty goals, and the only way to get rid of this threat is to terminate it. They weren't just killing those they thought were spies, because whoever they tortured, they forced them to give names. Yet, they had not done the crime they were being accused of. These were innocent people, so there were no names to give. And the names that they did give were of people they knew. Maybe they didn't like them, or it was simply random. However, it ended up killing families. These prisons would take friends, coworkers, anyone you'd associated with, and kill them alongside one another. For 3 years, the regime repeated this devastating pattern. It wasn't sympathy from abroad that stopped the Khmer Rouge, but hubris from within. Even though their population was starving, their leadership had been purged, and their army was weak, they decided to invade Vietnam. It was the tactical leadership you'd expect from the Khmer Rouge, which led to it barely even being a war. Vietnam, within a few days, had already taken almost every major city. The Khmer Rouge fled back into the forest, and Vietnam set up a government of its own like it. But the Khmer Rouge weren't dead yet. They'd survived for roughly another 20 years in the jungles, still keeping some power and putting a lot of pressure on the government to change, to fear them. It was because of the major powers backing them abroad, people were so opposed to what was happening with communist Russia, how the Soviets were coming down to Vietnam to impose their style of communism, that they were willing to back the Khmer Rouge, despite what they'd done internally, knowing that the genocide had happened. So the Khmer Rouge stay in the jungle until the late 1990s. The Vietnamese, uninterested on fighting a rebellion in Cambodia, try to step back, but cannot let the Khmer Rouge take over again. However, in the 90s, the UN steps in and puts the king back in power. The king from the very beginning, who is an oppressive dictator, Hun Sen. So all they've done is revert 30 years before, as if none of it had ever occurred. The Khmer Rouge are still in the jungles, the king is in power, and there are external threats constantly deciding the fate of Cambodia. In order to convince the Khmer Rouge to come out of the forest and disband to become part of normal society again, they make a deal that gives them near amnesty. Despite these leaders having committed a genocide of their people, many go unpunished. Having been the victim of political unrest for the last 50 years, Cambodia has become one of the poorest nations in the world. Cambodia's poverty has been exacerbated by intense globalization that has provided a fertile ground for the development of organized transnational crime, and child trafficking is just one of these underground trades. Globalization has influenced sex trafficking by not only increasing foreigners' access to the child sex tourism industry, but by also fueling the migration of poor people in search of economic opportunities to urban areas. With economic opportunities sprouting only long distances from most people's rural homes, children are often forced to travel extensive distances to urban cities in order to search for employment. Unfortunately, it is these opportunities that traffickers feed off of and used to coerce or deceive children and women into sex trafficking. Cambodian society largely operates outside of brothels and street corners to subject these victims into the positions they find themselves in. Cambodia is a nation that has been the victim of mass political unrest and corruption for decades now. As jobs disappear, food becomes scarce, and worries about survival rise. Cambodians are being forced to adapt to their struggling economy and alter their living patterns in order to make a living. Despite the economic necessity for evolution, some dangerous aspects of Cambodian culture are deeply entrenched in and maintained by the patriarchy that subjects women and children to a subservient social status that restricts their agency. This patriarchy is most recognizable in the restrictive laws implemented during the Khmer regime that listed instructions and prohibitions that applied to Cambodian women. Ironically, one of the most economically successful industries in Cambodia is also the most detrimental to women and children. Estimates deem that the global human trafficking industry generates approximately $32 million annually, but accurate figures are assumed to be much larger due to most of the industry operating underground. Despite this large sum, the patriarchal attitudes of Cambodian culture ensure that women and children compromise of most of this industry due to their established subservient place in society. Children and women are the largest commodity in the sex trafficking industry, and this vulnerability stems from the gender and age discrimination ingrained in their culture. Sex trafficking is an epidemic that stretches across the globe, but certain cultural standards produce societies that not only thrive on but protect these illicit activities. Cambodia's cultural ideologies, combined with a lack of beneficial foreign intervention, have contributed to the subordinate position sex trafficking victims find themselves in that renders them powerless.
ពេលហ្នឹងខ្ញុំអស់កំមុំហើយណាមួយខ្ញុំឃើញម៉ែខ្ញុំហើយនៅម្ដុំផ្ទះខ្ញុំហ្នឹងវាគេរស់ស៊ីចឹងណាឃើញគេមានលុយមានអីហើយខ្ញុំក៏ដាច់ចិត្តទៅធ្វើចឹងដើម្បីឲ្យយកលុយហ្នឹងឲ្យម៉ែខ្ញុំ
What began to happen in communities, if a woman was expecting a baby, if she had a baby girl, they would say to her, you've scored the jackpot. It's okay because you've had a girl, and now if you have financial challenges in your life, you've got this security asset. And if you need to, you can sell her.
Hãy subscribe cho kênh Ghiền Mì Gõ để không bỏ lỡ Darling